Yeah, good morning everyone, and thank you for coming along to this seminar, Boom to Bust, Ghost Towns in Western Australia. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are presenting from, the Whadjuk people, and to pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. So, my name is Tamara, and today we're going to explore the history of ghost towns in Western Australia. My colleague Taryn, who I think you can see somewhere over on the right, yes, she just waved. So Taryn and I will be sharing some fascinating stories of the once thriving communities that shaped our state's development from information obtained from the National Archives collection, the State Library, state records, and various online resources. Now, we just wanted to let people know that we've heard many different opinions on how the names of some of these places are pronounced, and we've gone with our best guess. We will have time as well for questions and story sharing at the end of the session. And if you are located in WA, we really recommend you visit our exhibition or visit us at our Northbridge office to see our exhibition, Ghost Towns, Stories from the Ruins, before it finishes at the end of this month. So, the Macquarie Dictionary describes a ghost town as a deserted or semi-deserted town, but we hope that you will see that ghost towns in Western Australia are more than that. They were often thriving centres with all the conveniences and enjoyments that could be found anywhere, and records remind us of their important place in WA history. They are located throughout Western Australia, but the majority we have found are centred around a natural resource, which often means mining. Some ghost towns lasted for decades, while others came and went in the blink of an eye. Even today, some of the ghost towns still linger, and many left long legacies, even after they'd been lost to time. Many of these towns supported large populations for their time and supported them in many different ways. As an example, Niagara, which was located in the goldfields, was famous for having 4 hotels, one on each corner on the crossroads in the centre of town. Very important. These places might be gone, but they are full of people, opportunities and stories that we hope to share. Information about ghost towns is littered throughout the National Archives collection and appears in the most expected and unexpected places within our records. These towns are sometimes the subject of an entire file, with the records describing their rise and fall, or they might just be a passing mention in something as simple as a letter or a letterhead, with us the reader often none the wiser that the town mentioned in the correspondence no longer exists. As an example, on the screen, you can see 2 letterheads from businesses that operated out of a town called Reedy. Reedy was located north of Kew and south of Meekatharra in the Midwest region. Gold was discovered in the area in the early 1930s, and a town site was gazetted in 1934. The letterhead and letter on the left is from John Bell of John A. Bell, Taylor and Mercer, and he was tendering for the conveying of mail from Tuckanarra to Reedy in 1934. The 1935 letterhead on the right is from the Triton gold mine. The Triton mine was opened around 1934, and in 1935, the superintendent, Mr. McLeod, was inquiring as to when telephonic and telegraphic facilities would be provided to the Reedy post office. At the time, all telegrams were being received through the mine's telephone connection, which entailed a great deal of extra work for the mine office. Reedy, however, wasn't to last, as the mine was closed by 1949, and as Reedy the town was entirely dependent on the mine for its existence, there was an almost complete exodus of population from the locality. Moving south to the Goldfields Esperance region, this 1922 letterhead has 2 ghost towns for the price of 1 appeal. Broad Arrow, the location of C. Killington's wholesale and retail store, and its branch in Ora Banda, where this letter originates from, are now ghost towns. Mr. Killington is writing to the Postmaster General's department as he has sold his burners and he wants to pass on his mail contract to another. For some history, Broad Arrow was gazetted as Kurrawa in May 1896, but Broad Arrow was officially adopted as the name in January 1897. In 1900, it had a population of 2,400 with 8 hotels, 2 breweries, a stock exchange, and a large hospital. In the case of Ora Banda, another gold mining town, the town had a population of 2,000 in 1910 and was gazetted in 1912. If Ora Banda strikes a memory for anyone, it was the site of the 2000 fatal shooting of Gypsy Joker Billy Grierson. Another Reedy example, this April 1940 letter was addressed to the Postmaster General of Perth from Mr. Selleck, a resident of the town. He had many complaints, from not being able to receive his parcels to the fact that every parcel he had received from the local post office had been opened, as evidenced by the holes in the packaging. At the time, he complained that information of a private nature was being dispersed about the town when it could have only come from one source. He concluded the letter to the Postmaster General, which you can see on the screen, by asking if the Reedy Post Office constitutes a semi-Gestapo office in your organisation. The Geraldton District Inspector reported that the misdelivery of the parcels was an accident, but there was no foundation for the assertion the parcels were tampered with, and it was more likely that the parcel fastenings and wrapping had come loose during transit. He also noted the Reedy postmaster, Mr. A.G. Lehman, was a reliable person, and there was no truth to the assertion that parcels were being tampered with or that secrecy requirements were not being observed. Sorry, just having a bit of technical difficulty. We're back. So, stories of ghost towns are also evident in the Postmaster General's Department records that we have in the National Archives collection. When a post office changed hands, the outgoing staff would need to account for all the items within the post office. So that's everything from iron safes to clocks to balls of twine. So, as well as knowing how many inkwells and pigeonholes some of the post offices have, we have records filled with the imprints of the office stamps and seals. And these simple stamps can tell us fascinating stories about the places that no longer exist. Take the Reedy record, which is on the right, where the office stamp at the bottom says Reedy, but the office seal at the top says Triton. While I was unable to find a specific record explaining, sorry about that, just getting, all right. While I was unable to find a specific record explaining this and why there are both, there is a lot of correspondence in the Reedy Post Office files about the naming of the post office. For some additional background, the Reedy Post Office was first located at the Triton mine, as Mr. McLeod, the mine manager, had agreed to provide a separate room for the post office. In January 1934, sorry, we're just getting a few. Oh, sorry, the cursor is in the way. Sorry, apologies, just give us a second. Hide the Teams video. Hi Dee and David, I'm not too sure about that. Hannah, are you able to offer some assistance?
Hello, this is other Hannah at National Archives here. We'll just, don't worry about the chat tomorrow. We'll just answer any tech problems and you can keep going with the presentation. And
okay.
We'll try and sort it in the chat, but it'll probably ding a bit while you're talking, but we'll try and help you out, Dee and David.
All right, sorry about that. Where were we? Okay, for some additional background, the Reedy Post Office was first located at the Triton mine, as Mr. McLeod, the mine manager, had agreed to provide a separate room for the post office. In January 1934, the Reedy town site was still being surveyed, and there was only one properly erected house, which was a boarding house for the Italian community. There were no shops, and the postal service at the time was putting the mail in a box on the fence at the mine manager's house, and the residents would sort it out themselves and take their own mail. By February 1934, the town of Reedy had been laid out, but there was already 4 other post offices in the Commonwealth named Reedy, and Triton, the name of the mine, was seen as a more distinctive name. The Postmaster General's Department had already decided to name the post office Triton, and a date stamp had been cut. And while the mine manager wanted the post office called Triton, 90% of the correspondence was addressed to Triton. The local football, cricket, and other clubs were all designated Triton. Local tradespeople had their stationery heading Triton, and Triton had almost universally been adopted. The honourable member for the lands wanted the post office named Reedy, as the town site was known as Reedy, and the locality had been known as Reedy for a great many years. Unsurprisingly, in June 1934, a memorandum was sent noting the non-official post office Triton had its name changed to Reedy. We are also able to paint a picture of many of these towns through the newspapers that have survived and which show a glimpse back in time at what life was like. Let's take a look. The East Murchison News, which you can see ran from 1900 to 1911 and was printed in a town called Lawlers. Gold was discovered at Lawlers in 1894 and the town was gazetted in 1896. In 1905, it was the principal township and social centre of the East Murchison Field and had a population of around about 700. The edition on the screen is from September 1900 and it contains local, national and international news, and it will probably not surprise you, a large number of ads. Adverts for land sales, where you could purchase a property in Lawlers for £10, adverts for hairdressers, and an advert for those general stores in outback towns that carry everything, such as D.D. Hickey, wine and spirit merchant, but they were also a general storekeeper, building materials, mining requisites, crockery, and glassware. And Callahan & Co., general storekeeper and produce merchants, where you could also buy drapery, boots, and ironmongery. There were quite a few adverts for hotels as well, and you will be happy to know that there was a piano on the premises of the Lawlers Hotel. This was different to the Victoria Hotel in Lawlers, which only advertised their comfortable seating rooms, but the Royal Hotel, well, they were under the patronage of His Excellency the Governor Sir Gerald Smith, and they advertised that they had the best brands of wine and spirits, and they had free stabling. My favourite newspaper is the Kew Big Bell Chronicle and the Reedy Recorder. It ran from the 1930s to the 1940s, and if you're interested, we have a blog post about this newspaper, among many others, on our website. My favourite piece, or my favourite part of the Chronicle, is the extensive section detailing everyone's comings and goings from the district, including where they were going, why they were going, and for how long. The image on the screen comes from issue 4, and unfortunately we don't have issue 5, so I'm unable to check if there was an increase in crime over the coming weeks after all the vacant houses and how long their occupants were going to be gone had been published. We sometimes know what buildings in these ghost towns look like, or at least parts of them, from the photographs and records in the collection, usually captured for administrative purposes. As an example, this is one of the few images we have of the town UMI. And this is the post office in 1939. We can also get a feel for these towns and, in a way, the places from their descriptions. So gold was discovered in Niagara in 1895, and the first postmaster, John Gerrans, didn't take charge of the post office until later that year. The event that led to his appointment is quite interesting, and we've written a blog post about it, but as a bit of a tease, it involved a hiring, a firing, a pub, and a large number of complaints. When John, the first postmaster, arrived in Niagara, he found his post office was only temporary and had been constructed out of hessian. It had 2 rooms, but no floor, and the dust was 2 inches thick. He didn't have a table or chairs, and he had to make do with boxes. There was no safe, and he noted, "This is an awful rough place. No police protection, and nearly every place is a hotel or beer saloon. Drunken men make disturbances every night." And also noted, "It's a very expensive place to live." This gives you a bit of an idea of what Niagara was like. Niagara didn't have a permanent post office until 1897, which was built by the Bunnings brothers. But in 1899, the Niagara population was diverted to nearby Kootenai anyway. Big Bell in the Midwest was gazetted in 1936, and the same year, postal facilities were provided at the Big Bell gold mine. A small office was provided by the mine manager, free of rent, and mail and offices were conveyed by car from Kew. Offices that also carried a necessary revolver, as the cash was said to be of considerable value. However, it was argued Big Bell was big enough that they deserved a post office, and to do this, all the businesses in town were listed, including 2 general stores, 1 butcher, 2 bakers, 1 newsagent and tobacconist, 1 draper, 2 tea rooms and mixed, and 1 motor bowser. The erection of other businesses was projected, and a tender had been accepted for the building of a large hotel. Big Bell was famous for having a pub with the longest bar in Australia, and I'm unsure if this is what's being referenced here. Big Bell, however, never got an official post office. Long before Google Maps, we had the handy mud map, and our collection contains many hand-drawn maps of ghost town locations and the layouts of buildings within these towns. As an example, on the screen, you can see a hand-drawn map showing the locations of Tuckanarra, Stakewell, Reedy, Nananine, and Meekatharra in relation to Geraldton and their relation to each other. The purpose of this mud map is what it is. It's a map used to describe where Reedy was and how far away it was from everything else and why postal facilities were necessary. What is really interesting is that it's 2023, and these locations are not easily available on Google Maps. If you search for Stakewell in Western Australia, you often get a number of restaurants that are serving steak. If you search for Nananine WA, you get a general location between Meekatharra and Reedy. And the location given as Reedy doesn't appear to be the old town site, but rather the turn-off from the highway. So congratulations, everyone. We all know more than Google Maps right at this moment. So these 2 images come from the non-official Big Bell Post Office from April 1937, the one on the left, and then in March 1945, which is the one on the right. It seems that sometimes when a new postmistress or master took the job and there was a change in location, they would sometimes supply these diagrams of how the post office would be set up, which is the case here. So with the image on the left, you can see someone has taken the time to draw in the doors and the windows and to identify most of the features of the new post office. You can also see the artists for both images had different ideas of what a door should, or how a door should be depicted in these pictures. So this now brings me to Comet Vale in the Goldfields Esperance region. Apparently named after a comet visible at the time gold was discovered. It had a population of 500 in 1895, but was not gazetted until 1916. It must have been a really rough place to live. A 1921 Western Argus article noted the Comet Vale water supply, which was being sent by rail at the time, was being supplemented by fresh water found in 2 old mine shafts. However, let's focus on the post office, and this is a flyby tour. The story starts in January 1948, with the postmistress falling off a box and breaking her leg, which after a long series of events resulted in a visit to the post office from the Kalgoorlie District Inspector in late 1948, and they found the accommodation provided for postal purposes can only be described as deplorable. In fact, the building has reached such a condition of disrepair that it must be classed as decidedly dangerous. Termites have wreaked havoc on the structure as a whole, and large areas of the flooring have been totally destroyed as a result. Very little effort has been made to effect repairs in any form, apart from covering the worst ant-eaten portions of the flooring with boarding, flat iron, lino, etc. Despite this action, there remains gaping holes with a 2-foot drop to the earth's surface underneath. The report contained 2 images. The first, which you can see here, depicts the town of Comet Vale at the time, and as you can see, it was rather small. Now, this drawing is of the post office, including the layout, the holes, and what they're being covered with. Assuming the door down the bottom right is the customer entry, a large area of the counter was obstructed by a hole. 2 years later, due to the decline in population at Comet Vale, only 5 people remained in the town, and combined with the unsatisfactory service rendered by the non-official postmistress, postal facilities were withdrawn as of the 15th of February 1950. Which brings me to people. I've spoken quite a bit about ghost towns as places, but ghost towns are more than that. They are places filled with people, and their individual stories are all littered throughout the National Archives. The collection holds a large number of World War I and World War II service and repatriation records for people who were born or enlisted in what are now ghost towns. These include people who were born at places such as Cossack or UMI, and in the case of Mr. Richard Sidney Johns, he's pictured on the left. He was born at Day Dawn. Mr. Johns enlisted in World War II in Big Bell, which is also now a ghost town. Some people also appear to be named after ghost towns. Thomas Gwalia Davies was born in Gwalia on the 2nd of July 1898, and he enlisted in World War I at 20 years of age. His enlistment papers are on the right. His father, Thomas Davies, lived at the Mount George Hotel in the neighbouring town of Leonora, and Thomas later moved to South Australia, where he enlisted in World War II. Another Thomas, this is Thomas Joseph Bradley's World War II application for enlistment in the Royal Australian Air Force as a motor transport specialist. And in the application, he included his past experience of driving for the Postmaster General's Department on the mail route between Tuckanarra and Reedy. He noted he could do all repairs, from changing tyres to brakes, radiators and engines, and he was accepted. Many of these World War II enlistment papers have photographs attached, which lets us put a face to some of the ghost towns and their communities. On the screen on the left, we have Frank Devine, who was born at UMI in Western Australia. Mr. Thomas Bradley is in the middle, who worked the Tuckanarra to Reedy mail contract. And on the right, Mr. Wallace Fleming, who was also born at UMI, and there are many, many more. These pictures say nothing more than, I was here, I existed. And for us, we now know something that they didn't, which was they were all connected in some way to a place that no longer exists. That is all from me. Thank you very much. And I'm now going to hand over to Taryn for a look at some of our other records.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Tamara. Let me just get my correct screen up. So, as you've seen from some of the great examples Tamara has shown, records created by the Postmaster General's Department don't just record the mail. Many postmasters in small towns wore various hats, taking on the role of customs officer or telephonist for their local communities. Their stories and the stories of the town in which they lived and serviced have been recorded in postmasters' diaries. Notes written in the Wittenoom postmaster's diary tell us about staffing, customs tasks, radio and telephone facilities, as well as the weather, which for the town of Wittenoom included cyclones, earthquakes, floods and bushfires. It seems they copped a lot. The postmaster in charge in 1969 even recorded a theft by 2 local boys, aged 11 and 9, from the post office tea fund. The pair made off with 60 cents through an open window. During his employment at the Wittenoom Postmaster as the Wittenoom Postmaster, Jim Kirkley described his working conditions in the diary as hardly ideal. Working with no fans or heaters in an unlined corrugated iron building, Jim had been reassigned from his position as postal clerk in Port Hedland to Wittenoom, where he worked until September 1952. The only chair in the post office was a beer crate. No furniture arrived until he had been in the position for several months. The £19 per fortnight Jim received only just covered the cost of the hotel in which he stayed for his entire 22 months of his employment. No other accommodation was available. In the diary, he wrote, "Looking back, I can recommend such an experience to all aspiring postmasters to teach self-reliance, determination, and job satisfaction. Job satisfaction only because nothing thereafter would prove half as frustrating." The Wittenoom official post office was opened in June 1954. Other significant events in the town of Wittenoom were recorded in detail by the various postmasters during the town's long lifespan. In August 1975, a sizable demonstration was held at the local picture theatre by the town's children to highlight their disapproval at the 100% price rise of movie tickets. It was a peaceful demonstration which had prior police approval, and the postmaster's own children were involved, so he attended to make sure there was no trouble. Mr. Toth, the cinema owner, swiftly accused the local P&C committee, the youth club, and the postmaster of organising the demonstration, and according to the diary, he had told a group of visiting tourists of his distaste for the postmaster. "The postmaster is the biggest rabble-rouser. He plans all the dirt that is thrown in this town." Mr. Toth even pointed out that the kids had made their placards on the postmaster's own back veranda. The postmaster demanded a written apology to be displayed in the cinema window, and after some back and forth, Mr. Toth did in fact apologise for his accusations. In the times before cinemas, a sign of a thriving community in the late 19th and early 20th century in regional Western Australia was surely the size or number of its pubs and breweries. After a long day sifting through the dirt with nothing to show but a few gold pebbles, a cold locally brewed beverage was the only day's reward for many. They were gathering places where, after a day's work at the mine, people could share a yarn while escaping the harsh West Australian heat. This was how many great goldfield stories began. Many West Australian ghost towns had breweries, hotels and pubs built to service not only the permanent inhabitants and local miners, but the many prospectors passing through during the gold rush days. 7 years after it was gazetted, Kookanie already boasted 11 hotels, all of which served its locally brewed alcohol. The Kookanie Brewing and Bottling Company erected the Kookanie Brewery in 1903 and trademarked their Poppet Legs Pale Ale a year later. It was reported they spared no expense in procuring the latest brewing machinery, and the brewer and manager, Mr. Thomas Elliott, had successfully established the Broad Arrow Brewery the previous year. This image of the brewery was turned into a postcard for the town. The National Archives West Australian collection holds indexes for trademarks created by the Colonial Secretary's Office from 1885. These are a great source of information about what goods were being created and marketed across the nation and include a number of trademarks by companies from now abandoned towns. The type of goods trademarked give an indication of when towns prospered, as new innovations and goods increased as communities and wealth grew. In March 1897, William Hines of Kew applied to trademark a glass bottle design for his aerated water business. Aerated water was a new and popular innovation at the time. Aerated water and cordial factories sprang up in many West Australian towns from the late 1800s. Kew, once known as the Queen of the Murchison, was named after the prospector Tom Kew, who found the first good alluvial gold a few miles from the town centre. 12 years after this find, Kew had a state school with 200 pupils, a hospital, 3 churches, a gentleman's club, a recreation reserve, a racecourse, 2 newspapers, 1 fire station, 3 banks, 2 breweries, 13 hotels, and 3 wine and beer saloons. The Excelsior was one of the breweries in Kew, and it produced its popular Excelsior bottled beer and stout. It had 3 delivery carts to convey its products to purchasers. Although Kew has never been completely abandoned, like nearby Big Bell, its population dwindled as its gold finds slowed. It was the same for nearby Daydawn, a once thriving settlement in the Murchison region. Foreman and Bone Cordial Company of Daydawn was started around 1903, and its aerated water factory brewed ginger beer and various cordials until around 1910. The owners of the company, George Bone and Walter Foreman, trademarked its Foreman and Bone design glass bottles in May 1903. Daydawn's local mine, the Great Fingal Mine, was abandoned around 1918, followed by the town site in the 1930s. A different drink, a fruit champagne, was trademarked by Gustav Seebeck and Co. in Canowna in the late 1890s. It was named Westralia French Champagne. Seebeck and Long later created bottle designs for the aerated water sold in the town by the White Feather Castle Brewery. The White Feather Castle Brewery in Canowna began operation in May 1897, and the feather beer and stout was so popular they were bottling 40 dozen bottles per hour to keep up with the demand during the summer that same year. The Gwalia State Hotel was the first stop for many of the employees of the Sons of Gwalia mine after a hard day's work. Opened in June 1903, it was constructed by the state government to combat the sly grog trade. The Sons of Gwalia mine began operation in 1897 and was managed by Herbert Hoover, who later became the 31st President of the United States. Italians and Yugoslavs made up a large portion of the mine workers. However, they faced fierce resistance from trade unions who advocated for the regulation of non-British labour. A series of state-run hotels were built across Western Australia. The Gwalia State Hotel was the first of these to be constructed at a cost of £6,000. But the hotel received some backlash throughout its time. Often called the state groggery by newspapers, its managers were accused of serving liquor too generously to its patrons. There was a suggestion that the Sons of Gwalia mine had had to close on various occasions because the people were so drunk they were not able to work. The local police followed up on these accusations, reporting that this had happened when the miners, most of whom were Italian, had held celebrations upon receipt of the news of the victory over Austria in 1915. There was a fair amount of drinking, and the following day, the men, still celebrating, did not go to work at the mine. The police had requested that the hotel close until the miners returned to work, although they did state that the men were drinking no more than what occurs on payday. Over the next few decades, the population of Gwalia fluctuated along with the mine's production until the mine finally closed on the 28th of December 1963. Gwalia was deserted almost overnight by the unemployed miners and their families. With less than 40 people remaining in the town, the local store, post office, and the Gwalia State Hotel closed in 1964. Gwalia can now be described as a living ghost town. There are around 12 occupied houses, and its museum was opened in 1972 in the former mine office. The museum displays a collection of objects and photographs, and the Shire of Leonora funds the Gwalia Ghost Town and Museum, ensuring the town's history is preserved. Other ghost towns, just like Gwalia, have managed to utilise their beautiful old buildings to draw in passing tourists, giving the town a new purpose and life while sharing great stories from its past. Cossack, in Western Australia's Pilbara region, stood empty for decades until its fortunes dwindled from the after its fortunes dwindled from the waning pearling trade. Some of the town's stone buildings were restored during the 1970s, including the Cossack Courthouse building, which was built in 1895 and designed by Italian-born British architect George Temple Poole. It now hosts the Cossack Museum, where visitors can learn about the town's history as one of Western Australia's largest ports in the late 1800s. Cossack's restored customs building is now used as a cafe, and the old post office is a gallery selling local art and handmade products. Stories from towns that no longer exist make them all the more fascinating to visit. In Kanowna, all that remains is a few signposts along a dirt road. People driving through might not even know they are passing through an old town site, which was once a bustling community and a large part of WA's goldfield history. At one point, Kanowna had a population of almost 12,500 people, but by 1898, gold finds were already declining and prospectors searched in vain for scraps amongst the dirt. The town's priest, 26-year-old Father Long, had a keen interest in prospecting and had mentioned to his parishioners a desire to see a large nugget before all the gold dried up. 2 local miners obliged and showed the father a large sickle-shaped gold nugget weighing 100 pounds in the bottom of a sugar bag. The pair told Father Long where they had made their discovery, but quickly swore him to secrecy. A few days later, when Father Long's parishioners told him they could no longer find any gold, he told them, "I know the gold is still there. I can't tell you where, but do keep looking." This sent rumours flying about the secret find, and crowds began to gather, gold fever turning their frustration into anger. Father Long was persuaded to reveal the whereabouts of the find, and on the 11th of August 1898, a large crowd congregated in front of the Criterion Hotel to learn where the golden sickle, also called the sacred slug or the sacred nugget, had been found. It was said to be one of the biggest meetings of miners in the goldfields' history. Father Long reluctantly addressed the crowd, explaining that he had been told that the information in confidence, but he finally spoke. The nugget was found a quarter of a mile this side of the nearest lake on the Canalpi Road. As soon as the location was revealed, thousands of people rushed to the spot to find absolutely no sign of gold. The whole thing had been a hoax, and the so-called sacred nugget had been a gold-painted drill can shaft. Over the town's short lifespan, around 30 tons of gold was unearthed. The sacred nugget is not included in this total. The event was reported in the newspapers across the nation, and books have been written about Kanowna's mining hoax. As Tamara mentioned earlier, newspapers published in ghost towns can be a great source of stories and information about the comings and goings of the town's inhabitants throughout its lifespan. In Eucla, the telegraph station staff published a monthly newspaper titled the Eucla Recorder, which described the various social outings of the town's inhabitants from around 1898. At first, this seemed very strange to me, as records suggest there was never more than about 100 people in the town at a time. Surely, like any other small town, they all knew everyone's business already. But the paper was written for entertainment purposes, clearly evident through the passage included in one of its editions. It reads, "If what is recorded here does not every humour fit, we pray you find no fault, till we can find more wit." Social events included frequent tennis matches and expeditions to the nearby caves. Many events were held on special occasions, such as Easter or Christmas. You can see in this photograph, most of the residents and visitors to the town spent Easter Sunday one year at the grandstand Eucla Racecourse. Many of the photographs of Eucla within the National Archives collection are of the day-to-day activities like fishing off the beach, swimming, picnicking, or playing a quick game of billiards at lunchtime in the telegraph office. In my opinion, these are the most fascinating images. You can see what regular people got up to over 100 years ago in a town that is now buried by sand dunes. By 1947, there was a very small amount of residents left in Eucla. At the time, it was only Mr. Ivers who ran the Eucla Hotel, his wife and his 3 children. Their nearest neighbour lived about 100 kilometres away in all directions, and Eucla no longer had a post office. In a letter to the editor of the Postal Notes newspaper, who was writing a story on regional postal services, Mr. Ivers wrote, "I receive letters addressed to the Eucla postmaster, the Eucla medical superintendent, the Eucla police station, and recently one from England addressed to the Lord Mayor of Eucla. So I'm beginning to think I must be a leading light in the social world at Eucla." The National Archives were lucky enough to have been given many of the photographs and records for Eucla by a Mrs. Gurney who lived in Eucla during the 1950s. The Gurney family owned Mupina Station in Eucla in 1942 and also lived at the telegraph station in the postmaster's residence. They had intended to pull apart the remaining 5 buildings for materials to build a new residence on the station, but instead decided to offer them as accommodation for travellers. In an interview, Mrs. Gurney did with the National Archives when they travelled to collect the records, she stated that historical documents and photographs appear to have been being used as fire fuel by the residents' previous inhabitants. Luckily, Mrs. Gurney saw the historical significance of this material, which dated back to the beginning of Eucla's telegraph history in 1875, and contacted the archives. While searching for information for this portion of the seminar, I came across a register of mails received and dispatched at Eucla office, dating 1888 to 1902. I realised this must have been one of the Gurney's finds, or should I say the Gurney children's finds. You can see on this document, little Roma Gurney has used it as her sketchbook at one point in time. So we can't finish our seminar today without sharing some ghostly tales, one of which brought Eucla back into the spotlight long after its inhabitants left. UFO sightings became common during the Cold War against the background of political and military tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States and its allies. Many sightings were recorded by travellers crossing the Nullarbor during this time, some close to Eucla and some just over the South Australian border and near the Woomera rocket range. On Easter 1954, 3 young men stated they were followed by a flying saucer object for 80 kilometres near Eucla. The men declared to the local police that they had taken photographs of the object. However, when they had reported the observations to the authorities, their camera had been confiscated and handed back later, minus the film. Another kind of sighting that occurred just before Christmas 1971 put the tiny town on the air highway back on the map. Victorian man Jeff Pearce was on a drive from Perth to Adelaide when he stopped in Eucla and reported that he and a few mates had sighted a mystery girl in the bush with a kangaroo. Word somehow got out and the world's press dubbed the girl the Nullarbor nymph, a half-naked white girl living amongst the kangaroos of the desert. After the story broke, there were a number of sightings reported by kangaroo shooters, bus drivers and tourists, some of whom would stop and leave the girl food and water on the side of the road. There was also apparently a photograph captured of the young woman. Journalists from across the globe descended on Eucla, and even the BBC sent a news crew with the hope they could capture footage of the mystery girl. The Eucla Motel saw one of its busiest times in the months following the report until early May 1972, when it was confessed that the whole story had been a Christmas hoax. Jeff Pearce worked in public relations and on Christmas Day on 1971, he had been unable to pay his hotel bill. To solve this predicament, he promised the hotel owner he would create a publicity stunt that would put Eucla on the map. Jeff confessed to the spinning of the tale and that the photograph of the Nullarbor nymph was actually a photo of the partner of a local kangaroo shooter who was in on the gag. The story of the Nullarbor nymph has stayed with Eucla. A mockumentary has even been created about the whole affair. This sign hangs at the Eucla Motel.